So I wanted to go over the benefits of exercising for the human brain in this first video. But before I do that, just an introduction into myself personally, who I am and what I'm sort of looking to do with this channel. So I work primarily within the insolvency sector, and what we do is, I guess, deal with companies that have gone into liquidation, or voluntary administration, or receivership and managership. Basically, our duty is to try and either get the company back on track financially, or if we can't do that and it's just in too much financial distress, we'll basically just liquidate and wind down the company altogether. I've also worked in personal bankruptcy, which is actual individuals who've gone into bankruptcy and all that stuff. And apart from work, my main interest is sort of with the mind-body connection. So basically the impact of exercising, mindfulness, meditation on the mind and the brain. But then I'm also interested in spirituality and all those concepts. And then I'm also interested in Ayurveda, sort of what we eat and how our stomach affects our mood, all those types of things. And then also natural remedies for different illnesses, medical illnesses, detoxification. Also interested in Vedic sciences, so basically, ancient scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, which I'm sure a lot of you would be familiar about, and yeah, those types of things. And so basically with this channel, what I'm trying to do is just get sort of my ideas across. It's just a good platform to do so, share my knowledge, and if anyone has sort of feedback on it, that'd be appreciated. Any comments would be appreciated. But it's also just a good opportunity for, everyone to collaborate their ideas as well in the comment section. So in terms of this actual video, so we all know about the benefits of exercising sort of for the human body, right? I've got a short list here. I can read it out, some of them. So, exercise provides more oxygen to the body. For those with hypertension, you would know that exercising sort of reduces the risk factors associated with it. Also in terms of cardiovascular fitness, that improves as well. Basically your heart rate would improve, it strengthens your bones, maintains mobility and improves coordination, and you lose fat if you've got some excess fat. If you exercise, you're going to lose weight. So everyone from sort of kindergarten to sort of upwards from those ages know about some of these benefits for the human body. But what we don't really know too much about is sort of how's the human brain impacted? I think these benefits are really fascinating as well. So there's a lot of different electrical sort of and chemical reactions that are going on in the human brain after we exercise, which change our brain fundamentally. And so John Ratey, who sort of is a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, but he's also, really well known internationally for doing things in neuroscience about the mind-body connection. Well, he did a lot of sort of experiments. He analyzed a lot of experiments, and he analyzed a lot of studies that had been undergone, and he saw that there is a mind-body connection. And going further from that, he saw that aerobic exercise, and a really specific type of aerobic exercise, which I'll cover more in the latter part of this video, it actually has the ability to sort of change our brains. So basically what he saw was that our brains aren't sort of, inflexible. They're flexible in the fact that they can actually change over time through different activities that we do, such as exercising in particular, but also other things like mindfulness and meditation. But John Ratey focused mainly on the exercise part. So just to begin with, in his book, he sort of discloses this experiment that they did at this high school called NAPERVILLE High School. I think it's in America. Basically, there was two groups of students. And the first group, they did vigorous exercise before they had this English class. And group B, I think they just slept in before the class. So they didn't do any exercise. Basically, the group A students actually got a 17% increase in their reading and comprehension levels, which was 6.3% higher than group B students. So basically what John Ratey saw and what this experiment found out was that basically students who exercise perform better than those who don't exercise within tests, even if they study for the same amount of time or not just within tests, within different classroom environments, activities, for example. But this isn't only something that's observed in students. So, not just for young people, right? And this is interesting because Dr. Joe Dispenza actually saw that after 35, and a lot of scientists actually have seen this, after 35, well, until the age of 35, up until the age of 35, most of our subconscious thoughts and our habits and our patterns, so for example, what time we wake up, what do we do after waking up, what do we do before sleeping, all of these different habits, most of those habits would be solidified up until the age of 35, and then so after that it's very difficult to change. But what was observed with adults from exercising, specifically aerobic exercise, is that there was changes to the human brain even for adults. And this isn't just for people who are 35 years old, it's also for people between the ages of 50 and 64, for example. So these group of participants, they did exercise on the treadmill for a consistent heart rate for like 35 minutes, and they saw that these people had increased cognitive abilities, which just meant that their brain function improved and their creativity improved. So they were asked, I remember, how many different sort of items they could generate from just everyday objects like newspapers. And the people who did the exercise were actually able to come up with much more different uses. So their creativity increased, and because their brain function had improved. And then there was another sort of example outlined in that Spark book where adults were actually able to remember more words, 20% more words, in fact, after exercising versus not exercising. And basically, John Ratey, what he says is that exercise is like fertilizer. So, fertilizer we use on plants and we use on trees to try to make them grow more quickly. In the same way, exercise is like fertilizer, or what he actually terms in the book called MIRACLE-GRO. So basically, it's providing a miraculous way for growth. And in the brain, the way that growth happens is through neurons. So in the brain, we've got this protein, short form it's called BDNF, basically just Brain-Derived Neurotrophic factor. So it's a protein that's located in the brain, I think pretty sure it's in the hypothalamic area, something like that. I'll update that in the description if that's wrong. But yeah, it's also in other different parts of the brain, but primarily within that area. And BDNF, when they did a scientific experiment where they actually sprinkled some, of this protein BDNF in a petri dish, and they saw that when they sprinkled it on brain cells, those brain cells actually developed new branches, so they grew, and then they produced the same sort of branches or structural growth that is needed for learning. So if we take the same idea, we can say that BDNF is like MIRACLE-GRO, or exercise is like MIRACLE-GRO for the brain, because we produce more of this protein called BDNF. And then this sort of goes back to, human evolution and evolutionary processes, because if you think about it, the way that we hunted down in the beginning was, humans didn't really have technologies or fancy things to hunt, animals down. They would just have to chase down the animals, and this is what we call persistence hunting, until, the animals got too tired, because humans can actually run not faster but longer than animals. So, for example, when an antelope would run away from humans, those humans would then need to think, I need to find a way that I can find this animal and chase it down and hunt it down for purposes of my food consumption. And so while they were exercising, they were actually developing this problem-solving capacity. And so that's where this whole idea of, BDNF and, brain growth in the neurons actually stems from in terms of exercise for the brain. And I've got this sentence here. BDNF accumulates in reserved pools around the brain synapses and is released when a heart rate is elevated during exercise. This then naturally leads to heightened learning and creativity. So when that BDNF, after it's been accumulated, is released into our brain after the heart rate is increased during exercise, that's when all of this improved brain function, creativity, problem solving, ability to compute and process more quickly actually occurs. So basically our brain immediately after exercise it's almost like a super processor in terms of new information and new knowledge. And this is really important, as I said before, whether you're as a student, because you're going to be sitting an exam, or even doing a work scenario. So in any situation, the ability for the brain to be at its maximum peak performance ability is quite significant. In terms of practical applications, so the first question, what's the minimum effective dose to produce the best results? And when I say minimum effective dose just means what's the minimum amount that I need to do to gain the best results. We've seen people like Tim Ferriss do the minimum effective dose in exercising, such as gym. So he looks at the minimum effective dose, the least amount of work or activity required to produce the most muscle hypertrophy. In the same way, the minimum effective dose in terms of exercise for the brain is 20 to 30 minutes of aerobic exercise. So not anaerobic. Aerobic exercise is things like running, it's things like swimming, biking, so bicycling, at a pace that's consistent and sustainable for an hour or feel somewhat challenging. That's important to relieve sufficient BDNF. Somewhat challenging. Otherwise, if you go into a rate that's too challenging, so I'll give an example, which would be sprinting, you will produce BDNF, but it's not going to be at the same sort of quantity as aerobic exercises for 20 to 30 minutes, because your heart rate's going to enter the anaerobic heart zone, which does sort of limit your BDNF production. The best way that I would practically implement this into my personal routine, if I was a viewer of this video, would be doing it first thing in the morning. And this is sort of why peak performance authors such as Robin Sharma or Tony Robbins actually say that the best way to start your day is through vigorous exercise, which makes you sweat. Because in that process of sweating, you're releasing BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which actually allows your brain to grow new neurons. Basically, you'd become smarter, you'd become more efficient, you'd become able to process information more quickly. And alternatively, 20 to 30 minutes of exercise, not first thing in the morning. Maybe alternatively, you could just do it, I guess, prior to taking a quiz, or prior to a very important meeting at work, as an example, on your lunch break. We look at this word called neurogenesis a lot in neuroscience. So neurogenesis, just basically the ability to form new neurons. And BDNF, as I said, actually promotes neurogenesis. Basically, you grow new brain cells and allows you to process the information more quickly. But another thing that's interesting is that BDNF and neurogenesis, and Robin Sharma talks about this a lot, as well as John Ratey in his books like Spark, is that neurogenesis allows you to repair brain cells that have been damaged by stress, and oftentimes by chronic stress. This could be work stress, this could be school stress. But basically, when you exercise consistently and consistently improving your BDNF levels, you are improving your ability to recover your brain from stress. And Robin Sharma talks about this a lot, is that the benefits of exercise last 15 hours after the actual workout. So you could be on a Tuesday morning, working out, but then that benefit would last you until the evening, and you sort of feel all those benefits as well. And so John Ratey, in his book, he says that exercise provides an unparalleled stimulus. So basically what he means by that is that there's no other sort of stimulus that could provide this level of benefit to the brain, creating an environment in which the brain is ready, willing, and able to learn. And yeah, so that's just a quick image just to show those benefits. Exercising improves your BDNF levels. Again, BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF allows you to grow new neurons. That's neurogenesis. And there's increased synapse numbers and function. Synapse is just basically a component of the brain. And then increased vascular health as well. And then at the end, it's just got to mention protection from Alzheimer's disease. So as we age and as we get older, our ability to remember, so basically our memory capacity decreases. But the interesting thing is that exercise, which produces BDNF, actually produces better brain health, and a larger cognitive reserve, which means that you're protecting yourself from Alzheimer's disease. So a lot of us, we just exercise because maybe we want to look good for Instagram, or maybe we just want to look good for that perfect summer picture. But at the end of the day, these benefits are all very internal. So, you're exercising now so that you're preventing things like Alzheimer's disease in the future, because prevention is always better than cure. And then if we look at sort of now the link between exercising, BDNF, and mental health. So here we go. So hippocampus, that was the main sort of region that the BDNF is active within the brain. So hippocampus, and it's also located within the cortex. These are the areas that actually help us to learn and build new memories. The hippocampus is most sort of important in this situation. But as I said, when we go through a lot of sort of chronic stress, this can actually lead to psychiatric disorders. So we see a lot of people, especially within today's modern age, a lot of physiological sort of stress, and what I mean by that is that sort of mental health disorders that stem from just their thoughts alone, which is not really related to any extrinsic factors such as work stress. Basically, they're sort of overthinking or too anxious about things that they can't control, for example. And this happens because that area of the brain, the hippocampus, is actually changed by prolonged exposure to adversive situations. So as I said, the brain and the components of the brain is things that can be changed and is flexible, which is sort of contradictory to what most people think. So in the same way that that's a positive thing, it's a negative thing, because too much sort of stress can lead to that hippocampus area being affected negatively. So they've seen that there's links between the levels of BDNF in your brain and sort of things like depression. BDNF levels actually is decreased in depressed patients. So the less BDNF you have, the higher the risk of depression, the higher risk of sort of anxiety disorders, which then leads to things like panic attacks. But then, in clinical trials, what they do is they provide the patients with antidepressants. And one thing that antidepressants do, amongst the other many good things that it does too, is that it increases or upregulates the level of BDNF that we have. But then a thought here is that, okay, antidepressants do that, but, is medication always the best cure? So obviously, discretion is advised, and, medical advice should always be taken in these types of instances. But just as good thought to have in terms of prevention as well is that if intense aerobic exercises, like we mentioned before, for that sustained 20 to 30 minutes, increases BDNF, a daily sort of aerobic exercise plan, maybe first thing in the morning, is going to be really critical to sort of helping the patient recover and improve over time. And then also reduced levels of BDNF contribute to psychiatric disorders such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and Huntington's disease. So that's why things like BDNF and exercise is really important to sort of promote, protection of those neurons and generation of new neurons in the brain as well. So just as a conclusion to this short introductory video is that, all of the latest science is really proving that exercise is really, really good medicine for our brains. And we never really think about it in this way. We usually think about exercise as being really good for our body, but what's happening on the brain level. And so the practical application here was 20 to 30 minutes of aerobic exercise, such as running, swimming, or cycling, at a pace that can be maintained for an hour or feel somewhat challenging, is enough to release sufficient amounts of BDNF. And BDNF, as I talked about, has positive implications. It improves your learning. You can process new information much more quickly, reduce stress, and combat mental diseases such as anxiety, depression, and Alzheimer's disease. So what I was really interested in is the concept of having sort of maybe two students with the same, knowledge and experience, but maybe one student studies for 1 hour per week, and at the end of the year, his result would be higher than the other student who studies, 6 hours a week, which is significantly different. So my keen interest is, what's happening like I guess a physiological level between those two students is that, you know, one's awareness is much more higher. One would be more sort of, I guess, switched on and present in the moment while they were studying, and a lot of factors contribute to that. And one is that one student sort of would have more BDNF in their brains, which means their brain is much more conducive to bringing in more information at a much rapid rate. So basically, their brain is more of a sort of super processor, like in a computer, versus the other student who studies more, but then the results that they get is much less. And lastly, so in terms of the mental health aspect of BDNF, sort of a hospital in Norway offered students the option of either taking antidepressants or undergoing an exercise program. And both groups of patients, you know, found the same benefit. So even in terms of the mental sort of aspects as well, you know, exercising and BDNF is really good and positive in those ways as well. So yeah, that's the end of the video. Just a very short one to really begin the channel and just introduce myself, sort of what topics I'm interested in. And if you are interested, I've just got this short presentation by John Ratey himself on sort of the link between exercise and how it can impact on the brain. So I'll just link that in the description down below. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.